Every red line has been crushed beneath the heavy heel of fate. While the politicians in Washington are still busy throwing meaningless diplomatic dice, in the fire pit of the Middle East, Tehran has decided to overturn the chessboard. Last night, the sky no longer belonged to the proud F-35s, once praised as Israel's thunder gods. No, it belonged to the fury of the Persian lion, as the maddest, most horrifying scenario began to appear. The U.S. super fleet fled the Gulf of Oman in humiliation, leaving behind a trembling, isolated Israel inside the ring of firepower of the axis of resistance. The question is whether the Pentagon chose to withdraw in order to preserve its own existence, or whether this is the fatal crack in the shield once believed to be invincible in the West. When the Godfather pulls his feet out of the swamp, the one left behind can only stare into the barrel of fate and pray. Just how destructive is Iran's trump card, Khaybar Shekan Four, that it can turn the Iron Dome into worthless fragments? Why would a superpower like the United States choose to let go and climb ashore at the Gulf of Oman at the most life-and-death moment for its ally? And does Israel, the pampered child of the Middle East, still have any chance to turn the tide when the scythe of death from Tehran is already pressed against its throat? All the naked truth about this all-in gamble will be laid bare right now. Do not take your eyes off the screen, because the world order is being rewritten in blood and fire. Greetings to our viewers watching Wider Meaning. Before we go into the commentary, please like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the sharpest analyses of global geopolitical developments. Part 1. The trump card revealed as the steel shield turns into a heap of scrap iron. In the art of war, the side that holds surprise is the side that holds the sword of fate. And last night, Tehran proved to the whole world that they do not only know how to forge steel, they also know how to turn the West's billion-dollar technological prides into ridiculous piles of junk. The trump card, called Khaybar Shekan Four, is not simply a missile. It is a death sentence for the illusion of absolute safety that Israel has painstakingly built over many decades. Look at the brutal reality unfolding on the battlefield. When the first streaks of light appeared on the radar screens of the Arrow and David sling systems, the military elite in Tel Aviv were still arrogant enough to believe in a 99% interception scenario. But that was a deadly mistake, a complacency paid for in blood. Shekan Four, a third-generation long-range missile line of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, does not fly along monotonous parabolic trajectories that American supercomputers can easily predict. It is a maneuvering phantom in the upper atmosphere, an entity carrying destruction with its own artificial intelligence. With a range of up to 1,450 kilometers, Khaybar Shekan Four possesses a terrifying ability for extreme maneuverability in the terminal phase. Imagine a block of steel weighing tons plunging down from the stratosphere at Mach 10, that is, 10 times the speed of sound. At that speed, the air thickens like a wall. But instead of slamming into it, Iran's warhead makes sharp turns, masterful tail swings to deceive the guidance algorithms of enemy missiles. This is no longer a confrontation between firepower and shield. This is a hunt between a cunning old wolf and traps that have gone obsolete since the last century. Israel's layered air defense system is now going through the most humiliating hours in its history. At Nevatim Air Base, the nesting place of the expensive F-35 Iron Birds, the sky was no longer sheltered by the hand of God. Israel's interceptor missiles worth millions of dollars were launched only to chase digital phantoms, only to explode helplessly in the sky. Meanwhile, the warheads of Khaybar Shekan Four calmly pierced through the clouds and slammed directly into aircraft shelters and command centers with an error margin measured only in meters. The crack in Tel Aviv's steel shield has now split open into an abyss. People ask why a system invested with billions of dollars could be subdued so easily. The answer does not lie in numbers, but in Iran's philosophy of 10,000 arrows piercing the heart. Tehran does not play the game of firing sparsely to test reactions. They unleash swarms of hornets made of toxic cluster warheads. A mother missile, when approaching its target, bursts open into dozens of submunitions, creating a matrix of firepower that covers every gap in space. Israel's fire control radars at that moment look like a blind giant standing in a hailstorm, not knowing in which direction to raise its hands for cover, and in the end being drowned in a sea of punishing fire. Looking straight at the essence of it, one can see that Iran holds absolute initiative in this battle of minds. While the West is busy upgrading old codes on cumbersome launch platforms, Tehran's engineers have quietly perfected the art of saturating air defenses. Khaybar 49 is the symbol of the rise of a self-reliant domestic weapons empire, a steel-hard testament that the harshest sanctions over the past 40 years not only failed to choke Persian ingenuity, but instead unintentionally became the furnace that tempered the sharpest blades. Looking at the desolate ruins in central Israel, what do we see? It is not only material damage, not only billions of dollars vanishing into smoke, it is the collapse of a cult in which they believed that American technology was divine, that money could buy eternal peace in the heart of a hatred-filled Middle East. Iran has thrown a bucket of icy water into the faces of those in power in Jerusalem, reminding them that when the lion is cornered, it will not growl to beg for mercy. It will use its claws to tear open the enemy's throat. In this gamble, Iran is not merely playing to win a local battle. They are playing to crush the enemy's will to fight. Every Khaybar Shekan Four that falls is a knife thrust into Tel Aviv's military credibility on the international stage. It forces Israel's longtime allies to ask themselves in shock, are they betting their future on a tree that has already rotted hollow from the roots, an entity that only still has a glossy shell, but inside has shattered under the pressure of real warfare? The moment this trump card is revealed, the entire Gulf security architecture is immediately thrown off balance. Israel no longer holds the initiative as the hunter. They have officially become the prey, surrounded inside a labyrinth of firepower from which even they cannot find an escape. Tehran has established a new order of fear, in which every passing second forces the people of Israel to look up at the sky with bitter uncertainty. Where is the safe shelter now that the steel roof has collapsed? This is no longer a warning. This is the beginning of an era in which the strong are not the ones with the most money, but the ones daring enough to go all in with weapons they created themselves. Shekan Four is only the first chapter in the book of Persian revenge, a book being written by the very streaks of fire burning away the West's hope on the blazing land of the Middle East. Part 2. The humiliating evacuation as the American aircraft carriers leave the Gulf of Oman. If Part 1 was the blow that left Israel's defense system stunned, then this Part 2 is a bucket of cold water poured directly onto the so-called prestige of the United States Navy. In geopolitical games, the strong are not the ones who speak the loudest, but the ones who make their opponents shrink back without even needing to fire a shot. And last night, the world witnessed an unbelievable scene. America's mobile fortresses quietly left the Gulf of Oman in a suspicious silence. Do not call it tactical redeployment or positional adjustment. Those American terms are not enough to cover up the humiliating failure of the United States. So what made a carrier strike group worth tens of billions of dollars, escorted by Aegis destroyers, turn around when facing a heavily sanctioned opponent? The answer lies in Tehran's guts. Iran does not only have missiles, they have something more terrifying: the recklessness of one who has nothing left to lose. Imagine the Gulf of Oman at this moment as nothing more than a suddenly narrowed, stagnant pond, where America's steel whales are being surrounded by thousands of piranhas called suicide drones and unmanned speedboats. The Americans understand very well that in such a cramped space, the long-range advantage of carrier-based fighters becomes meaningless. When Iran's hornet swarms simultaneously leave their nests from hidden coastal bases, those steel monsters become nothing more than enormous living targets, slow and clumsy. The officials at the Pentagon are probably tearing their hair out because their own hot-headed arrogance has been completely read by Tehran. They brought the aircraft carriers there to intimidate, to serve as a moral pillar for their Israeli ally, but in the end they only delivered themselves onto the chopping block. When intelligence satellites reported that Iran had opened the lids of its Khalifa's anti-ship missile silos, those weapons called carrier killers, with flight paths twisting like a drunk man, the Americans understood that the price of arrogance was too high. Iran's superiority lies in the fact that they do not even need to fire a single shot that hits. Just a few fake loading movements at the military ports of Bandar Abbas were enough to make American admirals break into a cold sweat. This withdrawal is not only a military failure, it is a bankruptcy of psychological warfare. When the greatest symbol of Washington's power has to drift farther away in search of safety, the shadow of the American bogeyman in the Middle East vanishes like soap bubbles. Do you see how ridiculous this is? A superpower that always beats its chest and calls itself the global police force, always sailing warships around to threaten every ocean, now has to sneak away in the darkness of the strait. The image of American aircraft carriers leaving is like a paper tiger trying to avoid a puddle for fear of being torn apart. It exposes a bitter reality. American prestige now is nothing more than a glossy shell, hollowed out by hesitation and fear in the face of unconventional strikes. There is an old saying, avoiding the elephant is no shame, but in this case, the elephant is a country they had looked down on. This retreat is a wordless betrayal of Israel. Put yourself in the position of the generals in Tel Aviv. Your home is being shelled by the enemy. You turn to the older brother for help, only to find that he is busy pulling up the anchor and breaking his promise because he fears his own house might catch fire. That is not only despair, that is suffocating resentment from the depths of the soul. Tehran has been extremely skillful in turning the Gulf of Oman into a forbidden zone by using the very prestige of its domestic weapons. They do not need a mighty navy to confront in a straightforward broadside duel. They play the game of deep stabbing and ambush, using cheap sacrificial pawns to threaten the opponent's main rooks and cannons. This is the art of using weakness against strength, of using the cheap to defeat the diamond, something American military academies have never learned. Looking at the way the American fleet silently withdrew, we can clearly see that a new order is taking shape, an order in which the old rules of ocean control have been thrown into the trash. The Gulf of Oman is no longer NATO's private playground. It has become a furnace of firepower in which any foreign intruder stepping inside must leave behind a part of its bones and blood. This flight also strikes a fatal blow against America's alliance system in the Gulf. The Arab states, those who have always followed whatever direction the wind blows, have now clearly seen the true nature of the so-called American security umbrella. When crisis comes, that umbrella does not shield its allies. It turns into a cane for America to prop itself up and run for safety first. The image of the American superfleet fading behind the horizon is the full stop ending the legend of the West's unshakable presence in this land. Iran has won not by destroying the enemy, but by forcing the enemy to admit its own weakness. In this gamble, the Americans lost everything before the cards had even been fully dealt. And once the ghost of the aircraft carriers had retreated into the distance, Israel's sky became emptier and colder than ever before. The cries for help from Jerusalem are now nothing more than desperate echoes across the vast ocean, where the most trusted ally has just performed the most sorrowful and astonishing escape act in modern military history. Part 3. Israel in the Dance of Fire. The cry for help in desperation. Yes, my friends, in a tragic chess position, the greatest tragedy is not being checkmated, but realizing that the rook protecting you has suddenly vanished from the board at the most boiling, most critical moment. If the withdrawal of the American superfleet from the Gulf of Oman was a violent electric shock, then for Israel it was a cruel stab in the back. Now the pampered child of the Middle East must dance alone in the dance of fire, a dance of life and death, where every step can touch the abyss of destruction. Look at the way Jerusalem is frantically sending out hopeless SOS signals. Those transoceanic phone calls from the office of Israel's prime minister to Washington are now nothing more than the drowning cries of someone reaching out to a ship that is deliberately shutting off its engine to avoid the storm. Tehran's position has never been clearer. They do not need to flatten Israel in a single night. They only need to sever the umbilical cord connecting Tel Aviv to American life support and let the opponent struggle in the swamp of panic. Tonight, Tel Aviv does not sleep, not because they are busy celebrating, but because the air raid sirens have become the gloomy soundtrack of a nation cracking from within. When the roof of the Iron Dome is pierced through with holes by the steel arrows of Khaybar Shekan Four, the Israelis finally realize bitterly that million-dollar technology is only a child's toy before an enemy determined to fight all in. There is an old saying, when the fence falls, the vines climb, and Iran is the one controlling those vines, tightening around Israel's throat. Desperation is clear on every face among Jerusalem's military officials. They had grown used to bullying small militias with superior air power. But when confronting a missile empire with strategic depth like Iran, those proud F-35s suddenly become misplaced. They cannot stay in the sky forever when the airfields below have turned into shattered beehives. Israel at this moment is like a fish on the chopping block. It sees the Persian blade descending slowly, yet cannot move. That chopping block is geopolitical isolation. When the United States withdrew, the neighboring Arab allies, who had always only pretended to be friendly, also began making tactical retreats, leaving Israel alone in the encirclement of the axis of resistance. Israel's cry for help is not merely a request for more weapons. It is the scream of an entity losing its sense of direction. They are pleading for America to come back, pleading for NATO to intervene, but the only answer is promises and deeply concerned statements full of irony. Washington is now more concerned with saving the lives of its soldiers aboard the carriers than with plunging its hands into the pile of ashes Israel is suffering through. This is the price of gambling the entire fate of a nation on the purse and goodwill of a foreign power. Inside the underground bunkers, despair has turned into fierce arguments. The generals blame intelligence, the government blames the military, and everyone blames America for breaking its commitment. The position of Israel, the one that once called itself the master of the Middle East, has shattered like a mirror thrown against stone. They are facing a brutal reality. War is not a technology runway. It is a contest of steam nerves and endless reserves. Iran has been extremely shrewd in not delivering the finishing blow immediately. They are carrying out a geopolitical slicing campaign, cutting away piece by piece at the enemy's confidence. Every hour that passes without America returning, another part of the fighting soul of the Israeli military disappears. That despair spreads from the highest levels all the way down to the soldiers trembling in trenches along the northern border, where Hezbollah is growling as it waits for the moment to make its final pounce. Israel deceived itself for too long inside the cocoon of American safety. They believed that as long as Washington backed them, they could make storms and waves across the Gulf. But when the real Iranian storm arrived, the American giant chose to shrink into its shell and let Israel bear the full weight of the collapsing sky. The image of Israeli envoys running frantically through the corridors of the United Nations, knocking on the doors of allied embassies, looks like a beggar of power. They are going around asking for a little hope, a little commitment, but what they receive are only pitying looks. Persia has taught the whole world a lesson about supreme position. The one truly strong is not the one with the most allies, but the one who can make the enemy's allies flee in embarrassment. Israel's desperation today is a steel-hard warning to any country that believes in eternal security guarantees written on paper. Once the barrel of Iran's gun is pressed against the temple, every agreement becomes scrap paper. Israel stands before the threshold of a dark era, one in which its cries for help are drowned out by the explosions of missiles bearing the name truth. In this all-in gamble, Iran has turned over its strongest cards, and Israel, in the dying spasms of its faith, is realizing that the height of loneliness is when you realize you are nothing more than a sacrificial pawn on the chessboard of giants. This battle is not over, but the collapse of Jerusalem's spirit has already become a resounding victory for the Persians. Part 4. The deadly pincer as Hezbollah and the Houthis open fire together. In military doctrine, the height of torment is not killing the enemy with one sword stroke, but making them suffocate inside a cage of firepower with no way out. Last night, Tehran proved to the world that it is not merely a lone player, but a gifted conductor, directing a deadly symphony called the Axis of Resistance. While Israel was still busy staring at the sky, searching for the phantoms of missiles from Iran, right beside them and beneath their feet, the deadly pincers had already begun tightening. Put simply, this is the most organized gang beating in modern military history. A giant Israel, even wrapped in armor from head to toe, when surrounded by dozens of enemies stabbing from every side, death becomes only a matter of time. Iran's position lies in the fact that it does not need to send troops across the border. With only a nod from Tehran, the whole Gulf can explode in a meticulously staged scenario down to the smallest detail. Look at Israel's northern border. Hezbollah, Iran's most battle-hardened proxy force, is no longer playing the game of throwing stones and hiding hands with a few homemade rockets. They have flung wide open their strategic weapons warehouse. Those Katyusha launchers, those precision-guided Birkin missiles, are now falling like summer hail, turning all of northern Israel into a land of death. Imagine this. When the Iron Dome is exhausted by Iranian missiles, thousands of Hezbollah's cheap artillery shells come rushing in. It is like trying to use an expensive tennis racket to block a whole basket of stones being thrown in your face. You cannot intercept them all, and you have no more ammunition left to intercept. Hezbollah is not only striking military bases, they are striking the Jewish people's sense of safety. Tens of thousands of Israelis in Galilee are being forced to live underground like creatures of darkness. While above their heads, the whistling of missiles is a steel-hard reminder that God is no longer here to protect you, but that is only half of the nightmare. In the south, the Houthi fighters, those whom the West once looked down on as nothing more than sandal-wearing fighters, are now holding the key to Israel's throat. The port of Eilat, Tel Aviv's vital gateway to the Red Sea, now lies still like a graveyard of ships. The Houthis do not need 1,000-ton warships. They only need a few $1,000 suicide boats and Shahed suicide drones, and immediately the waters of the Red Sea become a death swamp for any vessel daring to approach Israel. This is an extremely vicious economic castration strike. When goods cannot reach the port, when insurance costs soar through the roof, Israel will not die only from missiles. It will die from the collapse of its supply system. Iran's superiority lies in the fact that it turns poor man's forces into gatekeepers of the ocean, making even the mighty fleets of the United States and the West shake their heads in reluctance and dare not intervene deeply. The strength of this pincer lies in its terrifying coordination. When Hezbollah opens fire in the north to draw away the Israeli Air Force, the Houthis strike in the south, while militias in Iraq and Syria harass the center. Israel is like a beast trapped in a cage, turning one way only to be slapped, turning another way only to be stabbed. The clearest image right now is of a noose tightening one notch at a time. Iran is the knot tier, and the rope itself is made of the proxy forces. The more Israel struggles, the tighter the rope closes around its throat. Every time Tel Aviv thinks of launching retaliation into Lebanon, it must glance toward Yemen, afraid that yet another oil depot or power plant will explode. That is the worst state of dilemma any nation can face. We must admit that Tehran has built a near-perfect ecosystem of war. While the United States has to spend billions of dollars maintaining costly military bases, Iran only needs to export drone technology and strategic vision to its allies. And the result? A lonely Israel being strangled by invisible hands, heavy with force. There is an old saying, when the tiger falls to the plain, even dogs despise it. But here it is not dogs. It is a pack of wolves tempered in fire and shelling. Israel once was a proud tiger, but when trapped in a narrow space surrounded by hostility on every side and abandoned by its greatest ally, that strength suddenly becomes useless. The flashy Merkava tanks and trophy systems now look like nothing more than heavy ornaments on an exhausted body. Israel's cries for help have now turned into groans of pain. They look north and see fire, south and see a sea of blood, and within themselves they see the collapse of an empire. This deadly pincer is not only crushing military infrastructure, it is crushing the soul of a nation. This formation was not built in a day. It is the result of decades of Iran patiently weaving its network, and now, when the time is ripe, Tehran merely has to pull in the net. Israel may win a few small battles, may eliminate a few leaders of Hezbollah or the Houthis, but it cannot defeat an all-encompassing net of heaven and earth that has covered the entire territory. This pincer gamble has pushed Israel into a death gate. When Hezbollah's gun barrel is already pressed to its ear and the Houthi sword is already set beneath its throat, every struggle by Tel Aviv only tightens that rope faster. The new order in the Middle East is no longer being decided in Washington. It is being rewritten by roaring volleys of artillery from the Lebanese border to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Part 5. Karg Island and South Pars, the powder kegs waiting to explode. In an all-out war, the smart side not only knows how to swing a sword, but also how to guard its purse and turn it into a deadly trap. While the West and Israel are busy calculating how to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, Tehran has quietly laid out an 8-trigram battle formation around the energy lifelines of its country. Karg Island and South Pars are no longer merely industrial zones. They have become floating fortresses full of explosives, ready to bring down the entire global economy if any foreign hand dares to touch them. Iran is playing a gamble in which if the chief dies, the king dies too. They understand that oil is the blood feeding the empire of the West, and they are placing their hands on the valve that controls that blood. Iran's position lies in the fact that it does not need to beg the West to lift sanctions. It uses the throat of energy itself to make the enemy tremble at the thought of opening fire. Look at Karg Island, through which more than 90% of Iran's oil exports pass. If you think this is an easy target for F-35s, then I am sorry to tell you that you are being naive. Iran has turned this island into a steel-coated porcupine in the middle of the sea. Layered air defense systems, from long-range complexes to dense anti-aircraft artillery networks, have created an inviolable protective cage. But the brilliance of the Persians does not lie in passive defense. Around Karg, they have planted a network of smart mines and Ghadir-class mini-submarines, turning the surrounding waters into a potential graveyard for warships. Iran is not only protecting its oil, it is using Karg as a magnet to attract firepower and then counterattack with lethal blows against the vital maritime routes. This is not defense. This is the art of using stillness to control motion, using the silence of giant oil tanks to intimidate the overheated mines in Washington. Leaving Karg behind, let us look southward to South Pars, the largest natural gas field in the world, which Iran shares with Qatar. This is not merely an asset, it is the thermonuclear heart of energy geopolitics. Tehran has issued an implicit ultimatum. If a single bomb falls on South Pars, the entire system of gas supply to the world will go up in flames in the literal sense. Imagine a scenario in which only a few explosions at compression stations send gas prices in Europe and America soaring to unimaginable levels. Iran does not need to strike New York or London with nuclear missiles, it only needs to shut the valve on South Pars with real firepower. This is the fuse hanging over the head of the world economy. Iran is the one holding the lighter, and the West is the one standing on a giant gasoline warehouse with trembling legs. While America and its allies are still fumbling with oil price caps and outdated sanctions, Iran has already taken a long step forward in making its energy infrastructure self-reliant. It has turned oil fields into real military strongholds. Tehran's position lies in the fact that it has turned strategic weaknesses into deterrent weapons. Think about it. Why is the United States hesitating to launch a full-scale strike on Iran's energy infrastructure? Not because of humanitarian concern, but because it fears a financial tsunami that would wash away its own economic achievements. Iran has turned every barrel of oil into a bullet and every gas field into an economic missile launcher. This is the art of using the opponent's own stick to strike his back, using the world's dependence on energy to protect the fate of one's nation. Tehran right now is like a giant spider sitting in the middle of its web of energy threads. Any small vibration from the other side is immediately detected and answered by that spider. Pipelines and refineries are no longer merely military targets. They are nerve cords directly connected to the stability of Wall Street. There is a saying, one can grab the person with hair, but how can one grab the bald man? Iran is the one with hair, yet wearing an extremely sturdy steel helmet. It holds the energy the whole world craves, yet is ready to burn the altar if pushed into a corner. That recklessness makes even the most pragmatic minds in the West shrink back. They realize that attacking Karg and South Pars is not a military move. It is collective economic suicide. Looking at the stillness of Iran's oil depots today, we see an astonishing confidence. While Israel is screaming over shortages of fuel for prolonged campaigns, Iran remains calm, stockpiling and running its system as if nothing has happened. This is proof of a war economy prepared carefully over decades of encirclement. The image of the flames lighting up the sky over South Pars is not only a symbol of wealth, it is a steel-hard warning to the American carrier groups lurking offshore. Do not cross the red line unless you want to see the world you dominate sink into darkness and decline. This energy gamble was decided before the first missile was even launched. Iran has already won in turning its assets into weapons of protection. Karg and South Pars will remain forbidden lands, where Western authorization must stop before the heat of Persian fire and gas. When the one steering the world economy is the very one you are surrounding, then who is truly in danger? Part 6. The West's tactical mistake. Using their own stick against their own back. In a strategic chess game, the greatest mistake is not making a foolish move, but underestimating the courage and intelligence of the opponent. For 4 decades, the West and Israel have trapped themselves inside a glass cage of arrogance. They believed that if they suffocated the economy, if they sanctioned every last screw, the will of the Persians would melt like wax before fire. But alas, last night the reality on the battlefield struck those desk-bound minds in Washington and Tel Aviv with a thunderbolt. What they called technological trash is now tearing apart Israel's sky. What they called backwardness is now forcing superfleets into a humiliating retreat. The West trusted too much in the branded label of its military hardware and forgot that in a life-and-death war, the survivor is not the one wielding a gold-plated sword, but the one holding a razor-sharp dagger forged in the darkness. Iran's position lies in turning scarcity into motivation, turning sanctions into a giant steel furnace to forge a terrifyingly resilient domestic military. The first tactical mistake of the United States and Israel is their worship of figures on paper. They believe that Iron Dome or Arrow were all-powerful guardian gods. But, my friends, war is not a laboratory test. Iran has been extremely shrewd in recognizing the fatal weakness of Western technology, its cost and its clumsiness. Look at the bitter figures. Israel must spend billions of dollars to shoot down missiles and drones from Iran that cost only a few $1,000s each. This is the financial castration strike Tehran laid out in advance. The West walked into the trap by racing in an arms competition where diamonds are thrown against pebbles. When Tel Aviv's purse runs dry, when America's ammunition stockpiles begin to show the bottom, Iran still calmly rolls out thousands of Hornets every day from the humblest mechanical workshops. That is the art of using the cheap to beat the expensive, of using quantity to crush imagined quality, a lesson the West has never been willing to learn by heart. Have you heard of the cocoon and the iron butterfly? The West used sanctions to create a cocoon around Iran, hoping it would suffocate inside. But no, in the darkness of isolation, Iran evolved on its own. It could not buy American chips, so it designed its own guidance systems based on a ruthlessly practical mindset. It could not buy new-generation fighter jets, so it turned ballistic missiles into mobile killers capable of wiping out enemy airfields before their aircraft could even take off. This is the most classic example in history of using the opponent's own stick to strike his own back. Those harsh sanctions themselves forced Iran to build a closed military supply chain dependent on no one. Now, when the United States tries to disconnect Iran, it realizes that Tehran had never been plugged into its system in the first place. The position of the Persians lies in absolute self-reliance. While Israel must wait for every shipment of aid from Washington, Iran only needs to press the start button on its domestic production line. So who is truly holding the handle in this war of attrition? We also need to speak about the humiliating failure of Western intelligence agencies. They pride themselves on satellites that can inspect every square meter, on networks of spies planted everywhere, yet they were completely blind to the real power of underground missile cities beneath the earth. They miscalculated completely the timing, the scale, and even the technology Iran used last night. It is like a giant shining a flashlight looking for a mouse, only to discover that the mouse has turned into a fire-breathing dragon lying right under its feet. The West was too preoccupied with reports meant to please politicians and forgot to face reality. A nation with thousands of years of history like Persia will never submit to childish sanction games. They used the enemy's complacency itself to nurture strength, and when the sword was finally pulled from its sheath, it was sharp enough to cut through every illusion the West held in the Gulf. While American generals are still fumbling with military doctrines from the Cold War, Iran has already entered the age of asymmetric warfare. They do not need 1,000-ton carriers. They do not need expensive stealth fighters. They only need cheap drones that can fly thousands of kilometers and ballistic missiles that can change direction like eagles. The ancients said, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will never be defeated." Iran has studied the United States and Israel down to the smallest strand. They know what the United States fears most: human casualties and economic crisis. They know where Israel is weakest: dependence on air defense and a narrow territorial depth. And they struck directly at those pressure points. The West's mistake was to look at Iran through the lens of a superior looking down on an inferior, and now it must pay the price of watching its entire Middle East strategy dissolve into smoke. My friends, this is the sternest warning of all. In high-tech warfare, technology cannot save minds that are poor in tactics. Iran has won not because it has more money, but because it has greater vision and a tougher heart. When one's own stick strikes one's own back, the one hurt most is the one who once confidently held that stick to intimidate the world. And in the furnace of the Middle East right now, the one holding that stick is clutching the wound in his heart while watching his opponent proudly establish a new set of rules. Part 7, The Scenario of Great War, a New Order Written in Blood. When the final smoke of gunpowder fades, what remains will not be fake peace treaties, but a new geopolitical map drawn in the blood of the defeated and the will of the rulers. We are standing at the threshold of a total war, where all the old rules of the West have been thrown into fate's gambling hall. Iran's position at this moment is no longer a challenge. It has become an objective reality that even the most conservative minds in the White House must bitterly admit. The Middle East chessboard has been overturned, and the pieces now no longer rest in the hands of the one with the most money, but in the hands of the one bold enough to slam the table hardest. The scenario of Great War is no longer a cinematic hypothesis. It is unfolding hour by hour, minute by minute, with enough destructive force to shake the foundations of modern civilization. Look at what is happening. First, Israel, once considered the West's unbreakable fortress, is now cracking apart in large pieces. The withdrawal of the American fleet is not merely a military action, it is the bankruptcy of a faith. The Arab allied states, those who always looked to Washington as a guardian god, are now shocked to realize that this god also knows fear, and that this god is willing to abandon its believers when the specter of Khaybar Four appears in the sky. The United States and Israel once played the role of the dam holding back the Persian flood from pouring into the Gulf. But last night, that dam broke, and Iran's torrent of firepower is sweeping away every last remnant of Western influence. The new order is not being built in luxurious conference rooms in Geneva. It is being written on the burning sands of Oman, in Hezbollah's tunnels, and in the blazing eyes of the IRGC soldiers. If the Great War erupts in full, what is the worst-case scenario? It is an energy earthquake humanity has never tasted before. Iran does not need to occupy enemy territory. It only needs to turn the Strait of Hormuz into a bottleneck sealed shut. When the blood of oil stops flowing, the heart of the global economy will stop beating in less than 72 hours. This is the true weapon of mass destruction Tehran now holds. Its superiority lies in the fact that it is willing to suffer pain so that the opponent dies clinically. The West may have precision missiles and penetrating satellites, but it does not have the endurance to survive a financial chain collapse. Iran has turned its poverty into an advantage. The one with nothing to lose is always more terrifying than the one with too much to protect. We must call truth by its name. The unipolar era of the United States in the Middle East has officially been declared dead. A multipolar order, thorny and unstable, is taking shape. In that order, Iran is no longer an outcast. It is a regional referee. Every move Tehran makes now carries the weight of 1,000 pounds, capable of deciding the survival of a nation or the stability of a market. A crown forged from shrapnel. Iran is wearing that crown through resilience and battlefield intelligence. It has proven that power does not come from how many allies you have, but from how many enemies you can make tremble. Israel, from the position of the hunter, must now learn how to live in the darkness of the lower rank, must beg for existence rather than command the region. That is a great and bitter reversal of history for those who were once so arrogant. Iran's all-in gamble has been turned over, and what we are witnessing are only the first chapters of a history book written in fire. The U.S. super fleet has fled, Israel is crying for help in desperation, and trump cards like Khaybar Four have completely changed the rules of the game. The message from Tehran is very clear. The age of empty threats is over. From now on, every act of aggression will be answered with a merciless storm of fire. The West may still have reserve cards left, but Iran has proven that it is ready to burn together with the chessboard to defend the sovereignty and dignity of the Persian people. The world is holding its breath, waiting to see Washington's next move. Will it return to save a dying ally, or will it accept the brutal truth that the Middle East is no longer its playground? One thing is certain, the storm of fire has risen, and it will not stop until the real victor emerges from the ashes of old illusions. You are watching Wider Meaning. The most suffocating developments, the sharpest battlefield analyses, will continue to be updated constantly. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and press the notification bell so you do not miss any historical moment. Fight to win, and prepare yourselves for a world that will no longer look like yesterday.